Welcome everyone to the Canarian meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Mossy. I am an alcoholic serving as your secretary today. Could you join me for a moment's silence to remember the still suffering alcoholic both inside and outside this meeting? And Jane is here to do the preamble for us.
The AA preamble. My name is Jane and I am an alcoholic.
Hi, Jane.
Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other, that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. There are no fees or dues for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organisation, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses or opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Thank you, Mossy, for letting me do service yet again.
Thanks, Jane. A warm welcome goes out to any newcomers or anyone coming back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And at that, we're going to hand you over to Nancy, who's agreed to doing her thing on the women of AA. This is part 2 of it. Nancy, you're very welcome, and thanks again for joining us.
Oh, thank you all so very much and for your patience and putting up with me. I really appreciate that. You get extra points. My name is Nancy, and I am an alcoholic from Galt, California. And I'm so honored to be here and that you're willing to stay for an extra hour of this meeting. That really says a lot for you. I've been interested in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous since May 24th, 1972. So that means I've got 52 years in one day. Eleanor Roosevelt said, do something every day that scares you. So this is this is always it. We're going to start with the rest of the history of the women of the big book. And were many of you here for the first one? Did anybody see the first session? Oh, okay. Oh, got one that's I know Mossy was there. So I'm gonna do a screen share and get us going here. Come on. Back home. Start. Here we go. All right. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, indeed, Nancy.
Okay, good. All righty. So here we go. The concept of men helping men and women helping women evolved as a means of AA self-preservation prior to experience proving it wrong for the newcomer's sake. There were few women members, so Dr. Bob's wife, Anne, and the other wives worked with the female alcoholics. In the fall of 1935, a man we'll call Victor, a former mayor of Akron, and a lady we call Lil spent a rather sizzling evening at Dr. Bob's office. Lil was the first woman to seek help. However, she and Victor began writing the 13th step long before the first 12 were ever thought of. Apparently, it began at Dr. Bob's office on his examination table while he was at the city club for his revered Monday night bridge game. When Victor decided it was time for him to go home, the loaded Lil wanted to continue partying. So Victor called Ernie Galbraith to explain the situation. When Ernie arrived, he saw Lil going through Dr. Bob's cabinets and grabbing a handful of little pills and started going around the examination table, and she was trying to stuff the pills in her mouth. And Ernie recalled that it was just rather chaotic. And remember, this was Dr. Bob's son-in-law. Then she made a dive out a window, and Ernie caught her about halfway out. She is strong as a horse and used some profanity he had never heard before or since. And Ernie finally quieted her down, and Doc arrived. They took her to the Smiths' home and put her in a room in the basement where she sobered up for a while, and she stayed for about 2 or 3 days there. And that's from Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, page 97 to 98. Goes into the detail. Dr. Bob's daughter, Sue Windows, who was married to Ernie, said that Lil straightened out after a few years and got married and had children. However, she did not find her sobriety in AA. Then we had Jane Sturdivant of Cleveland, who was the wife of a vice president of a large steel company. Old timers remembered her telling the story of being left home to supervise the wallpapering of a room. She and the wallpaper hanger just started drinking and kept running around, getting all tangled up in all these rolls of wet paper. Later, her husband found them both passed out, all wrapped in shredded paper and paste and surrounded by empty bottles. She got sober in February of 1937 in Akron and stayed sober for 12 months. Apparently, she drank again because her story was not included in the first edition of the Big Book. Others came from the opposite end of the social stratus. There's a brief mention of an Indian waitress and an early member who sought help but was thrown out by the wives. She was so bad that they wouldn't even allow her in their homes. Florence Rankin, and this is not an actual picture of Florence. We don't really have one of her. This is someone who had that name. It was around that time, but not our Florence. Florence came to AA in New York in 1937, and after several slips, stayed sober over a year. Hers was the only story from a lady alcoholic in the first edition. In 1939, Mary Campbell, a former patient, called on Marty Mann when she was still a patient at Blythewood Sanitarium. If she had not slipped in 1944, Mary would have been the longest sober woman in AA. But she remained sober afterwards until her death in the 1990s. Today, 38% of AA members are women. We come a long way, baby. I've chosen 6 stories from the first and second edition of the Big Book because they were our women pioneers. This lady went on to play an important part in our service structure. Promoted to chronic, Helen Brown, New York. Page 485 in the second edition, page 464 in the third edition. Helen entered AA in New York in November of 1944, but had a slip in 1945. She started drinking socially and at parties and proms when she was about 20 years old. It made her feel quite grown up and mature. And another added attraction was that as far as her family was concerned, it was forbidden, which made it only more fun. She said I'd sneak a few drinks upstairs in my room, and then it began to be a habit. Eventually, she became dependent on it and became a daily drinker. Then she had a week-long bender of solitary drinking, locked up in her hotel room because the family opposed her upcoming marriage. During that week, the hotel doctor gave her sleeping pills, and she took the whole bottle. Only the actions of an alert hotel maid saved her. Helen commented, I figured that perhaps if I went ahead with that marriage, which I was sure was right for me, that the answer to my drinking problem That'd be the answer to my drinking problem. The next 5 years were filled with failure and frustration. Her doctor had suggested to her husband that he send her to AA, but little was known about it then. The doctor said that it was a bunch of drunks who helped one another. Her husband thought the last thing she needed was to be around a bunch of drunks. She had lost a child, her marriage ended, and she was living with her parents. She was in and out of sanitariums. Helen remarked, "Once I really started, I would retire to my bed and I'd drink myself into oblivion. I fought and I struggled, but to no avail. I was taken out of the house and put bodily into a waiting car with nothing on but a robe and a gown. I had the feeling that we alcoholics all know. What's the use? There was that awful alcoholic loneliness. I remember vaguely violent quarrels with my husband, his finding my liquor supply time and time again and throwing it out, and then waiting until I was sure he was asleep and stealing money from him to replenish the supply. I started going to a nice private sanitarium, which after the first visit turned out to be more like a country club than anything else. And I learned that if I could refuse to sign myself in, unless they gave me a glass of whiskey in one hand and a glass of formaldehyde in the other, it didn't help. And I decided I was no good. And I didn't want the help. Never would I be any good. And the sooner I could drink myself out of this life, the better. One day, her psychiatrist left Helen's case on the desk when she was called away from the room. Helen read it and was delighted to see that periodic drinker had been crossed out and the words chronic alcoholic substituted. Oh my goodness, she said, I left the office and I hurried down to tell all the other patients that I was getting better. I'd been promoted from a periodic drinker to a chronic alcoholic. AA didn't teach me that I was an alcoholic. Rather, it taught me that because I was an alcoholic, my life had become unmanageable. The same doctor who's sent me to the psycho had asked my husband, "Why don't you send her to this Alcoholics Anonymous?" At that time, there hadn't been any publicity such as we have now, and even Jack Alexander article on the Saturday Evening Post hadn't been written, and there was only a tiny group of people in Washington. So the doctor said, "Well, I don't really know too much about it, but they tell me it's a bunch of drunks who get together." And my husband interrupted, "She's bad enough now without getting mixed up with a bunch of drunks." And so in those following years, whenever AA was mentioned, I would have no part of it. In my screwed up mind, I kept thinking I could have gone to AA back there in 1940 and perhaps saved my marriage and home. I even wanted to, but I wasn't allowed to. So I won't go now. Finally, in November of 1944, she went to AA. AA took this wreck of a woman and brought her back to life. In Helen's words, in all the sanitariums and psycho wards, I had never met a single woman who said she was an alcoholic. They were always there because of a nervous breakdown or for a rest cure, any reason except for drinking. I saw that it was my life that was unmanageable, not just my drinking. With their help, I also saw, certainly because of some of the things that I had done during the years, I was bordering on insanity. I know that feeling. And so facing the record, I tried to believe that a power greater than I could and restore me to sanity. Her sponsor was a charming, delightful, lovely person, and Helen put her on a pedestal. She centered her life on this woman. Her sponsor recognized that she was depending on her and not on the AA program and began to pull away. When she broke a luncheon date with Helen, Helen got drunk to punish her. That was February of 1945, and Helen was sent back to the sanitarium, which she had been so often. In reading the big book, she exclaimed, here was a book that said that I could do something about that all these doctors and priests and ministers and psychiatrists that I've been going to for years couldn't do. When hospitalized, Helen realized she had not been basing her sobriety on the book or the group or the higher power, but on an individual. She started really working the program and never drank again. She commented that I had tried honestly and sincerely to practice the 12 steps. I would have seen from continuous moral inventory that I was getting off beam. And I would have found that there were some active resentments in my life and a terrific amount of self-pity. All of that if I had actually read that book. But more important, I would have found that once again, I was sitting in the driver's seat. I was running the show. I realized that all I'm guaranteed in life is today. Each of us has but one day. What we do with it is our own business. How we use it is up to us individually. The higher power to whom I want to turn and who had had sustained me had once again been thrust into the background while my emotions were running away with life. And as always, my emotions ran to the bottle. In December of 1949, Helen became a senior staff member at the New York office. She recommended Nell Wing to work as Bill's secretary. She had previously worked for the Boston Central Service Office of AA. She proved of tremendous help to Bill Wilson, especially in promoting the traditions and the General Service Conference idea to the fellowship, and in organizing the General Service Conference. She served as secretary of the first two conferences. She played quite a role. Helen also worked closely with Bill on the book called The Third Legacy. And if you look at your archives, you may have one of these copies there. I know we do in ours. Bill said of her on page 215 in Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age, Helen B. of the office staff had a real flair for statesmanship in the best sense of the word, and she understood practical politics too. Her assistance throughout proved invaluable. Helen ended with, my own innate selfishness and stubbornness are the evils which, left unguarded, could drive me to alcohol. I have come to believe that my illness is spiritual as well as physical and mental. And I know that for help in the spiritual sphere, I have to turn to a higher power. In March 1955, she resigned to be married and moved to Texas. This hold on a second here. This next lady is one in which I have a lot of identification. Nancy Flynn, the Independent Blonde, New York City, page 532 in the second edition. And let's listen to Nancy.
And in those days, we didn't all have cars and all that sort of thing. And we'd go in buses and we'd go in trolley cars and we'd go anywhere we'd find somebody drinking and didn't want to be drinking, we would be there. And that gave me something inside of myself that I had, that I didn't know I had, that I had something I could give away. And that strengthened my equilibrium, my ego or whatever. But I felt so good when I would do that.
Thank you, Nancy. Nancy came to AA in June 1945 when she was 39 years old. She did not write her story, which she was written by some other AA members. She claims she didn't even know it was in the big book. She left home at 14. Her mother had died when she was 3, and her father remarried when she was 14. Her stepmother kicked her out. Nancy said, when you're thrown out, you don't feel like you're anything. You know something's got to be wrong with you, or they wouldn't have thrown you out. And they tell me psychologically, I felt abandoned by my mother. All my life, I blamed everything that had happened to me on someone else. I could usually find someone. I thought if I left my husband, things would be different. I never thought about changing myself. I always thought about changing people or changing places. She had made a few geographic cures, but they didn't work. She kept quitting jobs, not having the courage to wait to be fired. And Nancy wrote that I heard about AA about a year before I came in, but I thought it was some kind of organization to help you out financially, and I was just too independent for that. But on June 1st, 1945, I had lost all of that kind of independence. Her contact with AA was at the clubhouse at 334 and a half West 24th Street in New York. Nancy said, I got someone on the telephone and I told her I was in trouble and asked, what should I do? And the girl said to me, well, ask if I could walk. And I said to myself, well, my God, how understanding. Someone who knows that you can't walk, and why? And then the girl said, well, the only reason I ask you is if you can't walk, we'll send somebody to pick you up. And I just reared up in all my arrogance. And I said, you will never come to me, but I'll go to you. It took me until 4 o'clock that day to get there. She expected to meet a bunch of drunk bums, so she did not get dressed up because she didn't want to look better than everybody else. So when she arrived, there were a lot of Park Avenue types there. And she says, I felt so welcome. It was the first time I felt welcome. I don't know who spoke first, last, or what, but somebody got up and said that they'd been in Bellevue 35 times. And I thought, oh my God, I'll look like Saint Cecilia here. One day, a call came into the clubhouse for someone to go out and do a 12-step job. They looked at me and said, well, how long are you in? And I said, oh, a week or so. And they said, oh, well, you can't go. You have to be sober 3 months. And then I realized that here I had spent all my life afraid that people were trying to get something out of me. And now I had nothing to give. I had to wait until these people gave it to me so that I could go out and give it away. She was impressed upon coming to AA to meet a countess, Felicia Gazitsky, from Stars Don't Fall in the Big Book. At that time, Nancy had a little beauty shop and often gave permanents to members of AA, those who could afford it and those who could not. She and another young woman, perhaps Marty Mann, were often asked to go to hospitals and drying out places frequented by the wealthy because they were younger and presentable. They bought little hats with hat flowers on them and wore little black dresses and pearls on these occasions. And I was so eager to give what I had, she said. I went right from the first step to the last step. You see, I'd never cared for anybody, not even myself. And when you care for somebody, you begin to heal for yourself. And you don't even know it. She often went to Dr. Silkworth for advice. If we were in trouble, we'd go to Dr. Silkworth. If we were in a situation we didn't know how to get out of or afraid that we might get drunk, we'd go talk it over with him. He's a very simple, wonderful man. He said to me one day, the day that you can just sit down and be honest with yourself in this situation, you'll know what to do. That was the kind of man he was. Nancy went to the clubhouse every day from 11 o'clock in the morning when it opened until they closed at night. It was the only place she felt safe. And Nancy ended her story with, the more I worry about me loving you, the less I'll worry about you loving me. And the happier I'll be. I've learned that the more I give, the more I will have. And the more I learn to give, the more I learn to live. For the first 5 years, she did nothing but go to AA. She didn't know what else to do. For 15 years, she attended a women's meeting that Marty Mann started in a home on 58th Street in downtown Manhattan. Marty wanted to hire her as a speaker for the National Council on Alcoholism, but she declined. Nancy is a good example of what people can accomplish after they get sober. She went to high school in her 50s and went to college when she was 70. She studied behavioral science and went to college for 9.5 years and graduated cum laude. When she arrived in AA, she didn't believe in God and didn't want to hear anything about it. I was the same way. And she began searching. Later, she became a Quaker and taught English to migrant workers. She lived in Pennsylvania and spoke at the 2000 AA International Convention in Minneapolis, and I was there to hear her. She passed away on April 16th, 2005, claiming 57 years of sobriety, although she drank twice during those 57 years. Time. Our next one was a real live wire. Unfortunately, I don't have a photo of Annie, but you can just use your imagination. Annie, the cop fighter, Annie Coalhouse, New York City, page 514 in the second edition. In April of 1947, Annie arrived in AA at 67 years old. She was a scrub lady for 25 cents an hour, poor and uneducated. She started to drink in 1913 at age 31 when women sat in the back room. Because of her drinking, her husband took her 2 small boys and left her. She says, it didn't worry me a bit. I love the liquor, and I love the crowd that I hung out with. I would have done anything get the money for a drink. she got in a fight with a cop and tore the buttons off his uniform. When the cop said he was taking her in, she says, "Do what you damn please." I was a tough piece of furniture in those days. If the Almighty God had come down, I'd done the same thing to him. She was charged with molesting a policeman's uniform, got 5 days in the house of detention. She said, "The only thing I was worrying about was how was that gang making out with me?" But they made out pretty well, all right. I was in court again for drunken disorderly. 30 days, says the judge, and I reared right up and I spit clean in that judge's eye. Distance of about 5 feet, too. The judge shouted, "Another 30 days for spitting in the eye of the court." "Well, nuts to you," says I, but I had to serve the whole 60 days. After being away from her family for 15 years, she was on her way to a speakeasy and met her husband, who asked her if she'd like to have a drink. Oh, yeah. Whoa, says, "Sure, I would." So they had a few drinks in the speakeasy and she went home with him. She couldn't stand the decent life and just wanted to be a drunk and kept on drinking. She gave her husband credit for raising their 2 sons. She said the youngest boy was going to be a policeman. Oh, brother. Oh, well, it was all right. I had to take it and accept it. But every time I thought of that uniform, it just killed me. She was obnoxious, stole change from the other customers, was black and blue for being kicked and knocked around. She drank with the guys and the gals on the Bowery, and her whole clothes on her body were filled with lice. Annie offered her old buddy Irene a drink, but Irene told her she couldn't take that first drink. Annie said, "Well, saints above, what happened to you?" "Well," I said, "nuts to you. I'm having mine." But Irene said she was going to get her yet. Annie replied, "Over my dead body." On May 12, 1946, she called Irene to take her to where she went on Sunday nights. So down to the old 24th Street clubhouse, they went to a beginner's meeting where she took Nancy Flynn, whose story in the big book, the one we just read, it was The Independent Blonde. The clubhouse disbanded in 1991. Annie sobered up in that night after 32 years of drinking. She said she never shook hands or said hello to anyone. She just ran in and ran out of meetings. She married another drunk and after 8 months got into an argument with him and drank for 2 days. She said, "The nosy AA's caught up with me somehow. This damn organization knows my whole business. Nobody ever stepped over my territory before in my life." Love the cat. She said, "I don't know what AA does to you, but you can never drink the same again." She was sent to a high watch farm for 2 days and returned a new woman. Nancy encouraged Annie to take her 5th step with the priest, and she told the priest, "Father, I'll tell you everything, but don't ask me how many times." She cursed a lot when she spoke, but then she'd look at the priest in the audience and say, "Excuse me, Father, but I'm trying to be careful." Nancy was a hairdresser, so was I. Still have my license. And when Annie came to the beauty shop, she'd charge her $1 because she never wanted her to think that she gave her anything, because Annie was very proud. And I had to learn to use this permanent wave machine when I was in beauty school in 1958. they look like an electric chair or something. Thank God we don't use them anymore. Annie later went to another beauty shop, and when they charged her $6, she says, hell, I can get it done for $1 up on Fifth Avenue rather. Annie concluded her story with gratitude for what AA had done for her. Her boys were back in her life, and she exclaimed, I live on that 24-hour plan. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. I don't mind the name of an alcoholic because I was called a son of a this and a son of a that, and an alcoholic is a good enough name for me. To newcomers, I say, go to meetings, and God take care of each and every one of you. Annie House died when she was about 74. This courageous lady has made an impact on the lives of countless alcoholics. Win Corm Laws, Freedom from Bondage, Ventura, California, page 553 in the second edition, page 544 in the third and fourth editions. Young, when she joined, this AA believes her serious drinking was the result of even deeper defects. She tells here how she was set free. Wynne joined AA in California on July 25th, 1947, at age 33. She was described by the novelist Carolyn C., one of her several stepchildren, as tall, with a face that was astonishing in its beauty. She had translucent skin with tiny dusting of freckles and Audrey Hepburn cheekbones, bright red hair, turquoise eyes. She was a knockout. She believed that her alcoholism was a symptom of a deeper trouble, that many of her mental and emotional difficulties began years before she began to drink. But AA taught her that she was the result of the way she reacted to what happened to her as a child. She learned that she could change this reaction pattern and match calamity with serenity. Bill Wilson's mother, Emily, divorced his father, Gilman, and he and his sister, Dorothy, were raised by their maternal grandparents there in East Dorset, Vermont. Wynne was born in Florida, and her parents separated when she was a child. She was sent to live in poverty with her grandparents in the Midwest. This common childhood experience just may have been one of the reasons for the reported close friendship that she had with Bill Wilson. She reports feeling restlessness, anxiety, fear, and insecurity. The only security I felt I had known anything about at that time was material security. And I decided that all these feelings would vanish immediately if only I had a lot of money. She married and divorced 4 times before finding AA and said, I didn't have the courage to love. I was not even sure I had the capacity. The first time she married for financial security, her second husband was Stan Kenton, a prominent band leader, and she sang with his band. Her third husband was an Army captain that she married during World War III. World War II. I'm getting ahead of myself. Her fourth husband was a widower with several children. One AA friend quipped when first hearing Wynn's story that she had always been a cinch for the program, for she had always been interested in mankind. She was just taking them one man at a time. Wynne stated there had been no emotional maturity at all, and I realized that this phase of my development had been arrested by my obsession with self. I was immersed in self-pity and resentment. Sound familiar? My resentment and shame and humiliation when I was sober were almost unbearable. As soon as my day was finished, I could drink myself into oblivion. I knew it didn't make any difference where I started. The inevitable end would be Skid Row. Wynne wrote, I attended my first AA meeting on July 25th, 1947. I take no sedation or narcotics, for this program to me is one of complete sobriety. I no longer need to escape reality. There is just one good drunk in every alcoholic's life, and that's the one that brings us into AA. I believe, too, that it's equally impossible to practice these principles to the best of our ability, a day at a time, and still drink. Well, I don't think the two things are compatible. A willingness to believe is enough for beginning. She wrote her story when when she had been in AA for 8 years, and her life had changed dramatically. She had not had a drink since her first meeting, and not only found a way to live without having to drink, but a way to live without wanting to drink. Sometime after 1955, when her story appeared in the Big Book, she married her fifth husband, George Laws, another member. George and Wynne were married for several years, and his daughter Carolyn lived with them for a while. Carolyn said that George and Wynne were a popular team at meetings. My dad was Wynne's opening act. He couldn't help but be funny. And then he would defer to Wynne, whose tale was hair-raising. After they divorced, according to Wynne, Carolyn dated a wealthy insurance executive whom she had hoped to marry. Apparently that didn't work out. Carolyn writes, Wynne's mother had deserted her in order to go out and live a selfish life. She contracted typhoid fever and hovered between life and death for about 90 days. All her hair, and though she would not admit it, her teeth fell out. She recovered after about age 16. Her beautiful red hair grew back in, and she wore dentures stuck in so firmly that nobody ever saw her without them. According to Carolyn, Wynne began carving out a career seeking men and money. I started drinking to bridge the gap between the grim reality that she was born to and the dream of American romance that she yearned for. Wynne said in her story that she didn't know how to love. Fear of rejection and ensuing pain were not to be risked. When she found alcohol, it seemed to solve her problems for a time, but jails and hospitals followed. When she wound up in a hospital for detoxification, she began to take stock and realized that she had lived with no sense of social obligation or responsibility to her fellow men. She was full of resentments and fears. An article by Norman Vincent Peale helped her with a 25-year-old resentment against her mother. He said, in effect, if you have a resentment you want to be free of, if you will pray for the person or thing that you resent, you will be free. If you will ask in prayer for everything you want for yourself to be given to them, you will be free. Ask for their health, their prosperity, and their happiness, and you will be free. Even when you don't really want it for them and your prayers are only words and you don't mean it, go ahead and do it anyway. Do it every day for 2 weeks, and you'll find that you have come to mean it and to want it for them. And you will realize that where you used to feel bitterness and resentment and hatred, you now feel compassionate, understanding, and love. I call this a 2-week diet prayer. If I miss a day, I have to start over. This prayer saved my first husband's life. And Wynne gave us precious gems such as these. I will have peace of mind in exact proportion to the peace of mind that I bring into the lives of others. As another great man says, the only real freedom a human being can ever know is doing what you ought to do because you want to do it. And that great man may have been Bill Wilson. And I get everything I need in Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything I need, I get. And when I get what I need, I invariably find that is just what I wanted all the time. Wynne and Jack P. of Los Angeles started more than 80 meetings in hospitals, jails, and prisons in Southern California from 1947 to 1950. Jack P. reports that during this period, they were widely criticized by other members of the fellowship who thought that this was something that AA should not be doing. And I got to meet Jack P. when I was new in sobriety. And Carolyn C., her stepdaughter, wrote that AA can said to have worked for my father and for Wynne. Although they would divorce, neither of them would ever drink again. Let's listen to a recording of Wynne from the 1955 International Convention in St. Louis, Missouri.
But it didn't make any difference that I didn't hear him. You see, I took something away from me, with me anyway. Something that was enough to make me get through the balance of that night without having to take a drink. Something that was enough to make me get through the entire next day without having to take a drink of anything. And this was something that I had sensed. Something that I had felt was present in the room. I had no name for it. And I've heard as many names as I suppose could be found in any copy of Webster. I don't think it matters what we call this thing that's present at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. I just know that I sensed you had something that I'd like.
Oh, her story really touches me. Wynne was the girl who lost nearly all, but changed, improved, and transformed thousands of lives. She apparently died in poverty of cancer on December 17th, 1974, at age 60. And gratitude to our women pioneers, and especially women like Wynne Laws who paved the way for us. I would like to acknowledge all of those who have carried the message to others, institutions, and to all who have received the message of alcoholics in an institution. Thank you for carrying the message of hope. And I'm sure many of you can identify with this next story. And unfortunately, I don't have a photo of Muriel. This is the housewife who drank at home, Muriel H., New York, New York. Page 375 in the second edition, page 335 in the third edition. She hid her bottles in clothes hampers and dresser drawers and realized what she was becoming in AA. She discovered that she had lost nothing and found everything. This story is of an alcoholic woman who stayed at home to care for her family. Her bar was her kitchen, her living room, her bedroom, the back bathroom, and the 2 hampers. She had never been a very heavy social drinker, but during a period of particular stress and strain, she resorted to alcohol in her home, alone, as a means of temporary release and a means of getting a little extra sleep. She'd didn't think a little wine would hurt her, but soon she was a chronic wine drinker and she needed it. And so did I. She said, I don't believe when I started that I even had in mind that I was drinking. I had to sleep. I had to clear my mind and free it from worry. And I had to relax. And I couldn't live without it. I just wanted to live to a certain age, carry through with what I felt was my job with the children. And after that, no matter. Half a mother was better than no mother at all. She became very secretive about how much she drank. She pretended to be doing a lot of entertaining when she bought more wine, not wanting the clerk to know that it was for herself. She wrote, I wandered from room to room, thinking, drinking, drinking, thinking. And the mops would get out, the vacuum would get out, everything get out, but nothing would get done. Toward 5 o'clock, helter skelter, I'd get everything put away and try to get supper on the table. And after supper, I'd finish up and knock myself out. If I could only stop thinking, I wouldn't drink. If I could only stop drinking, maybe I wouldn't think. But they were all mixed up together, and I was all mixed up inside. I didn't care what I looked like. I didn't care what I did. To me, taking a bath was just being in a place with a bottle. I could enjoy it in privacy. When the doctors prescribed a little brandy for her son to help him through the night when he coughed, she switched from wine to brandy for 3 weeks. She was soon in DTs and screaming on the telephone for her mother and her husband to come and help her. Muriel said, I know that alcohol and I had to part. I couldn't live with it anymore, and yet, how was I going to live without it? The people who would have come to help me were just the ones I would have nothing to do with. Thinking it would help if she got out of the house, she became active in civic affairs. As long as she worked, she didn't drink, but she had to get that first drink somehow. While she was out of the house, her behavior was fine, but her husband and children saw the other side of her. She had turned into a Jekyll and Hyde personality. She said, I came home with one of the most active women in the community. What with PTA and other community organizations and drives, I'd go into an organization, and it wasn't long before I was on the committee. Then I was the chairman of the committee. And if I was in a group, I'd soon be the treasurer or the secretary of the group, but I wasn't happy. My husband and my children saw the other side of me. I did too. And when the children were in school from 9 to 3, she started a little business and was fairly successful in it, but it was just a substitute for a drink, and she still needed that drink. When all of life is a substitute for a drink, there's no unhappiness, no peace. She tried switching to beer, which she hated. Now she grew to love it and would drink it warm or cold. Her husband, whom she had turned against and treated badly, stayed with her and tried to help her. Finally, a doctor recommended AA. At one time, the admission that she was an alcoholic meant shame, defeat, and failure. Now she was able to interpret that defeat and that failure and that shame as seeds of victory. It was only through the feeling of defeat and the failure and the inability to cope with life and with alcohol, that she was able to surrender and accept the fact that she had the disease of alcoholism and that she had to learn to live again without alcohol. So, go back here again. And there we go. In AA, she found for the first time that she could face her problems honestly and squarely. She took everything that AA had to give her. She surrendered. To her, surrender brought with it the ability to run her home, to face her responsibilities, to take life as it comes, day by day. She had surrendered once to the bottle, and she couldn't do those things. Muriel concluded, since I gave my will over to AA, whatever AA has wanted of me, I've tried to do to the best of my ability. When I'm asked to go out on a call, I go. I'm not going. AA is leading me there. AA gives, excuse me, gives us alcoholics direction and a way of life without the need for alcohol. The life for me is the one that is lived one day at a time, letting the problems of the future rest with the future. When the time comes to solve them, God will give me the strength for that day. She was brought up to believe in God, but not until she found AA did she know faith in the reality of God, the reality of his power that is now with her in everything she does. This lady tells it like it is and how she overcame fear. And I don't have a photo of her either. That would be Seal Mansfield, Fear of Fear, New York City, page 333 in the second edition, page 321 in the third. This lady was cautious. She decided that she wouldn't let herself go on her drinking, and she would never, never take that morning drink. Seal's date of sobriety, according to one source, was July 1949. Her husband, George, joined shortly before she did, and she exclaimed, I thought it was wonderful, simply marvelous for him, but not for me. She thought she was not an alcoholic, that her problem was that she was married to a drunk. Yeah, me too. But she finally admitted to a woman she met when she accompanied George to Greenwich Village group that she too had a problem. Seal added, for the first time in my life, I said to another human being, I'm having trouble with my drinking too. I knew it was just as much a drunk as George, if not worse. I nudged George the next morning. I said, I'm in. He said, oh, I knew you'd make it. She was one who never went to a hospital, never lost a job, and had never been to jail. Nonetheless, she was a severe alcoholic, and she would have lost her husband, but the fact that he was an alcoholic too helped to keep them together. She said, my husband liked to have a good time, and I was very young, and I wanted to have a good time too. The only way I knew to do it was drink right along with him. I always wanted to drink too much, so I was watchful, always watchful, counting my drinks and if we were invited to a party, I knew they were going to have one or two drinks, and that was it. I wouldn't have any. I knew that if I did take one or two, I might want to take 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. I really never did take a morning drink. I was still woozy from the night before. I lost my self-respect. I couldn't feel I could feel the fear coming into my life. I couldn't face people. I'd brazen out anything. I'd lie like a trooper to get out of many scrapes. Me too. I hid quite a bit of the time, and I wouldn't answer the phone. I stayed by myself as much as I could. I never knew it was the first drink that did it. I always thought I was losing my mind when I realized that I couldn't stop drinking. And that frightened me terribly. She wrote an update of her story entitled So Changed a Life for the September 1968 Grapevine, and as she tells dramatically how their lives had changed. When she came to AA, Seal had been spiritually, mentally, and physically beaten, and her children were ashamed of her and her family and didn't want to have any part of her. And she revealed that she could always come up with something that would throw me. It would be like little things like the rugs being crooked or any silly little thing that I could think was wrong. And I'd go off drinking and sneaking my drinks. Darn it, I'm gonna get my finger right here. I had hid bottles all over the apartment. I didn't think my children knew anything about it, but I found out they did. It was surprising how we think we fool everybody about our drinking. I would lie down on the bathroom floor, sick, praying that I would die, and praying to God as I had always prayed to Him when I was drinking. And you know this one well. Dear God, get me out of this one. And you could say the rest. I'll never do it again. And then I'd say, God, don't pay any attention to me. You know I'll do it all over again tomorrow. The very same thing. I'd egg George on to drink, to get started again, and then I'd start to fight with him because he had started. She reported that now the family trusted them again, and physically they were in better shape than they were when they came in, and their friends were all in the fellowship. She continued with, we have faith in each other, trust in each other, and understanding. AA has given us that. I can't afford resentments against anyone because they are the buildup of another drunk. I must live and let live. I try to live today so that tomorrow I won't be ashamed when I wake up in the morning. George had found it tough going financially for a while, so the women in A suggested that she get a job. She reflected, I could never be sure I'd have a clear head and hands that were willing to do some work when I was drinking. I felt depleted and whipped, and I felt I had the time. I certainly had the capability, but I never did a thing. So she finally went to work for a New York advertising agency as a receptionist, but soon gained the confidence that it took for a better job with more responsibility and a better salary. But she complained about the office politics and how the other women snickered when she told them that she did not tell lies. Office politics were often strange for her. She said that she had always been honest, even when drinking, but this office hanky-panky was new. She loved her work, but admitted that 19 years earlier, she would not have had the serenity to take the office politics. George finally got started in his profession again. So after 18 years, they were both still active in AA and did a lot of 12-step work. She expressed enormous gratitude to the fellowship for all it had given them. She said that they were not reformed drunks, but informed alcoholics. Seal said, I never thought I could be useful to anyone except my husband and my children, perhaps a few friends, but AA has shown me that I can help other alcoholics. I love my AA. It is the one fellowship that has given us our lives, our freedom, and our happiness. And she concludes with, I know to whom I owe my gratitude, my fellow members of AA. I am trying now each day to make up for that awful, selfish, foolish things that I did, all those things in my drinking days. I hope that I never forget to be grateful. An AA Grapevine, originally published in September 1968, appeared in the November 1979 issue celebrating her 30th sobriety. It was also reprinted in the 1999 AA Grapevine under the category of Big Book authors. She had been identified by one source as C.L. Mansfield, but her update was signed CF. Perhaps that was a typo. Yeah, in the AA Grapevine, or perhaps she had been using her maiden name for professional reason, or perhaps she remarried again after being divorced or widowed. We don't know. So, by the way, this grapevine that I'm showing here is that's the typewriter that was the same one that was, well, no, it's sort of like the same one, like the Corona that was on the AA Grapevine when my big book was published in the was published on the cover in the May 2019 Grapevine. Okay, she concludes her story with I know to whom I owe my gratitude, and I've got that. And she was just very grateful to AA for what it had done to her, and that her story was also reprinted in the 1999 AA Grapevine under the category Big Book authors. I told you that, and let's see, I got that mixed up. The stories from the first two editions of the Big Book can be found in the conference-approved book, Experience, Strength, and Hope. In the beginning, it was 4 whole years before AA brought permanent sobriety to even one alcoholic woman, like the High Bottoms, the women who said that they were different. AA couldn't be for them. But as the communication was perfected, most of the women, mostly by the women's, the picture began to change, and that was by Bill W. And I hope that you have enjoyed learning about these 6 incredible pioneer women of Alcoholics Anonymous as much as I have. And thank you for staying on there with me. I really appreciate that. That shows a lot of dedication on your part. Thank you, Mazi, for asking me to come and share with you.
Thank you, Nancy, for joining us. And Kathleen will do the promises for us. Will you?
Yep.
Thank you all again for being here.
Thank you, Nancy.
Promises. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us. sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them.
Thanks, Kathleen. And Nancy, would you wrap it up with the serenity prayer for us?
Of course. Thank you. You want the we version or the I version?
You have control there.
I like we. God, grant us the serenity
Serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thy will, not mine, be done.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Moz.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mossy.
I
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Nancy.
Thanks.